Okay, so my talk is about reworlding, and I've indulgently called it with an ecofeminist New Deal. So, and it's in two parts, and the first part deals with what I see as our dissociated culture, and the second part is more the proposal for a regenerative politics. So, way back when I was still at school, people used to talk about a famous book called The Two Cultures. It was written by an Oxford Don, remorseful over the fact that academia was seriously divided between the arts and the sciences. Decades later, as a sociologist, mother, environmental activist, I realized that Snow's dualism was simply one of many endemic to Western culture. In fact, the reason why the capitalist patriarchal mode of production is so destructive of life is that the underlying ontology of Europe draws a sharp line between history and nature. Then a culture of measurement would come to reinforce this 1-0 divide, wherein the human is accorded value, 1, while nature is 0. Moreover, as part of the not valued sphere, women, children, and Indigenous peoples would be objectified as closer to nature, 0. This old masculinist drive to ranking and measurement reduces all substance to discrete units. Material nature and time itself is reified, even priced. Today, jet travel, TV, electronic bank transfers, all displace and subsume everyday materiality at lightning speed. These taken for granted technologies reconstitute our human experience of time. Even socialists, Greens, Global South elites, and mainstream feminists often take this virtual world for granted as real. So their political solutions to our global crises are self-defeatingly linear. An ecological culture will understand how things are joined across time and space in an indwelling structure invisible to the positivist methods of science, a project that prioritizes the eye over all other senses. But this alienated form of reason and its instruments cut across nature's intricate score. Consider agroforestry, mining, nuclear weapons, road transport, where the plan is mastery, but complex rhythms in nature are disrupted and ecological disintegration results. If Descartes' cogito epitomizes the psychological dissociation of Western culture, the foundational 20th century liberal feminist philosopher, hello? John, are we still together?
Yes, we're good.
Oh, the picture has gone.
Oh, that's weird. I can see you.
Oh, you can see me, okay.
Take it from there, we'll see.
Okay. If Descartes' cogito epitomizes the psychological dissociation of Western culture, the foundational 20th century liberal feminist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir replayed the solipsism when she wrote, "Humanity is not an animal species, it is a historical reality. Human society is an antiphysis. It does not passively submit to the presence of nature, but rather takes over the control of nature, objectively in practical action." De Beauvoir's contemporary, the neo-Marxist Herbert Marcuse, was more astute. He recognized the idea of human mastery and control as a myth of very ancient origin. With early Frankfurt School colleagues, he saw the birth of this false rationality in the split of so-called higher faculties from immediate sensuous experience. That historic act of patriarchalism privileged the organ of sight so as to fix on the manipulable properties of objects. Instrumental mastery over an external objectified world was soon canonized in the binaries of analytic logic as against more experientially sensitive forms of dialectical thinking. De Beauvoir's Parisian nemesis, psychoanalyst Luce Irigaray, put it this way: Western thought has been dominated by the physics and mechanics of solid matter, whereas the feminine sensibility refers much more to a mechanics of fluids, which has barely been elaborated. As noted, a key outcome of this modernist epistemology was the abstraction and suffocation of lived time. Under the culture of capitalism, time is extracted from labour and product is given precedence over process. Irigaray, digging deeper than Marx, linked this specularity, productivism and its commodity fetish to the old libidinal custom of exchanging women's bodies as goods. So the elimination of time in the rationality of Eurocentric fathers yields knowledge only of a dead world. For the physicist, matter becomes mathematical and topographical relations, events, projections, possibilities. Sensitivity to the flow of nature is sacrificed to the functional operations used in its transformation. In medicine, as we know it, the body itself is reductively imagined as atomic units to be masterfully reassembled. Yet, as research by ecological feminist historian Carolyn Merchant has demonstrated, a shift from nature as organism to nature as machine was achieved through the bodily extermination of knowledgeable women, herbalists, and midwives as witches during the 16th century scientific revolution. Vandana Shiva, an Indian ecofeminist and former quantum physicist, observes this dissociated culture in the hubris of hydrological engineers who would control water by stochastic calculation. She says, when flood control measures accentuate floods and fertilizers rob soil of its fertility, the problem is not merely between use and misuse of technology. It is rooted in, it is embodied in the very process of knowledge creation. Winona LaDuke, activist with the US Indigenous Women's Network, notes that in American Indian cultures, with no separation of mental over manual labor, all parts of the natural order flow in cycles, whether these cycles belong to the moon, the tides, our bodies, seasons, or life itself. Within this understanding is a clear sense of birth and rebirth and a knowledge that what one does today will affect one in the future. A second concept from LaDuke, reciprocal relations, defines the responsibilities and ways of relating between humans and ecosystem. Thus, one could not take life for food without a reciprocal offering. You only take what you need and leave the rest. Against the one-dimensional reasoning of liberal feminists like de Beauvoir and some of her postmodern political daughters, many more people around the world access another conceptual space, a different conceptual space. This takes in its goal by concentric rather than linear scan, the object experienced from several points, holographically, as it were. Such knowing rests not on mere appearance, formal, visual, and measurable properties of matter, but derived from touch or a deeper, diffuse kinesthetic response to pulse. In this potential eco-culture, time, change, and contradiction are honoured. A new definition of objectivity comprehends the whole in all its moments. No interest here in control, vectors, invariant factors, functions, formulae, and expedient significance levels. A knowledge of the texture and timbre of material qualities in all their perversity is sought. A communion with the object rather than penetration by technological reason. The effect is an empathic, reflexive logic without incisive categorical boundaries between subject and object in process. A both and rather than either or. Old Eurocentric dualisms of man versus woman, white versus black, history versus nature are replaced by a metabolism of subject in field, the very body of the noun dissolved in the liquid realism of non-identity. Elaborating on this theme of subject-object collaboration, Evelyn Fox Keller spoke of a gender-free science, where nature is known as a subject with a heart of its own, one that beats through our own body cells. According to Canadian midwife turned philosopher Mary O'Brien, this capitalist patriarchal consciousness reels back from reproductive creation. Its alienation turns to an obsessive drive for artificial principles of continuity, monotheism perhaps, or the nation state. Perhaps the legal term incorporation echoes this same lack. By contrast, an ecofeminist ethic moves from fixed abstract formulae, like rights, into an extrapolation of caring experience. It emerges spontaneously when conditions of life, urban or rural, are put at risk by industrial impacts like climate change fires, engineered viruses, or electromagnetic radiation. This integration of thought, feeling, and relational context resonates keenly with Australian First Peoples' approaches to community governance. According to Kombu elder Mary Graham, here is a sense of place, very different from environmental management under the old 1-0 sign. Life-oriented holding labours open people to a self-consciousness quite at odds with the cogito of the unitary subject. Reproductive holding is based neither on separation and control of others, nor some ephemeral cosmic fusion, but on practical deferral, exercised by a strong, decentered subject. Aristotle's law, A cannot equal not A, is inadequate in a living world where A may well be in process of growing into not A. Further, since caregiving men and women don't have much to do with power and control, they don't need to project causation as linear. People who work with bodies and ecologies know well how events have multiple determinations at once. Their embodied materialist epistemology rests on a fusion of consciousness with field and a grasp of impermanence as they shape each other. So to look at this regenerative politics, by the 1-0 logic of North-South, industrial modernity treats people as human capital and land as natural capital, benefiting mainly an international minority class of entrepreneurs and government hangers-on. Under the globalizing economic development model, common land, water, biodiversity, labour and loving relationships are pulled away from culturally autonomous webs of self-sufficiency. That said, the established academic disciplines, captured now by the neoliberal university, support the colonising 20th century mindset. Some feminists, folk on the left, even Green New Dealers, have confidence that the dominant paradigm can be adjusted. The ideal of a globally fair and sustainable redistribution of the social product makes no thermodynamic sense. As anthropologist Jason Hickel points out, to meet the 2015 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the global economy will have to grow 175 times its present size, even as it already overshoots the planetary capacities by 50% each year. Contrast the hands-on ecofeminist management of humanity-nature metabolism among North Indian forest dwellers. Quoting Shiva again, "It's in managing the integrity of ecological cycles in forestry and agriculture that women's reproductivity has been most developed and evolved. Women transfer fertility from the forest to the fields and to animals. They transfer animal waste as fertilizer for crops and crop byproducts to animals as fodder. The partnership between women's work and nature's work ensures the sustainability of sustenance. Here is a regenerative, co-evolved social ecology, fully attuned to the rigours of scientific complexity. Similarly, Australian Indigenous peoples model an eco-culture that has lasted for over 60,000 years. For them, both farming and hunter-gathering are ecosystem holding labours. In this bioregional economy, the seasonal walk across country is made by them in the knowledge that with insightful harvesting, each habitat will replenish and provide again on their return. According to ecological economist John Gowdy, this kind of livelihood rarely takes more matter or energy than needed. Turning to city life, German ecology activist Ulla Terlinden spells out the tacit epistemology of care at the domestic periphery of capital. She writes, housework requires a broad range of knowledge and ability. The nature of the work itself determines its organisation. The work at hand must be dealt with in its entirety. The worker must possess a high degree of personal synthesis, initiative, intuition, and flexibility. Contrast this close empirical engagement with the numb, inconsequential division of labour from investor to assembly line operative. US feminist philosopher Sarah Ruddick, who coined the word holding, points to more parallels between good parenting and good ecological reasoning. To hold means to minimise risk and to reconcile differences rather than sharply accentuate them. Holding by a man or woman is a way of seeing with an eye toward maintaining the minimal harmony, material resources and skills necessary for sustaining a child in safety. It is the attitude elicited by world protection, world preservation, world repair. While minimising risk, often in the face of material uncertainty, such holding is the ultimate expression of adaptability. And while science as usual is marred by the separation of fact and value, space and time, a cautious awareness of interconnection is common sense in this ecofeminist reason. Ironically, the exacting empiricism of meta-industrial labour, its inbuilt reality testing, compares favourably with the most stringent standards of scientific falsificationism. To borrow from one Indigenous mentor, Jessie Werper, our way of life has good fit with country. For those schooled in Marxist sociology, the regenerative labour of mothers, grandmothers, subsistence farmers might be understood as a meta-industrial class. It's actually an essential material base or infrastructure of capitalist economics. Yet capitalist economics is not essential to it. While Western civilization is founded on an ancient epistemological violence, positing humanity over nature, man over woman, white over black, meta-industrials on the margins of productivism carefully balance living flows within bioregions. This work embodies sound ecological principles, and there are 12 of them. The consumption footprint is small because local resources are used and monitored with daily care by the provisioner. Scale is intimate and hands-on, maximising responsiveness to matter energy transformations. This means that meta-industrial labour is intrinsically precautionary. Lines of responsibility are transparent and accountable, far from the tyranny of small decisions that impairs bureaucratised economies. As local social structures are less convoluted than modern industrial ones, there is opportunity for synergistic reasoning, that is, solving several problems with the one solution. In domestic, organic farm settings or gathering livelihoods, multi-criteria decision-making is essential. Regenerative work patiently reconciles human time with unpredictable, non-linear timings in nature. This is an economic rationality that knows the difference between stocks and flows. It's an autonomous and empowering work process without a division between the worker's mental and manual skills. The labour product is not alienated, but immediately enjoyed and shared. Meta-industrial provisioning is eco-sufficient because it does not externalise costs through debt onto other humans or as entropy in nature. To paraphrase the great Chilean economist Manfred Max Neff, local self-managed provisioning models are synergistic, satisfying many needs at once. They're not only environmentally benign, but creatively social. Besides subsistence, they foster learning, participation, innovation, ritual, identity, and belonging. A high quality of life can be enjoyed on 3 hours work a day. By contrast, the engineered satisfiers of urban industrial societies like cars, computers, and bureaucracies cost much energy and time, sabotaging the very convenience they were designed for. Yet at multilateral summits, the UN or IPCC, the other experience of caregivers, small farmers, and First Nations peoples is experienced and presented as cultural, not economic. This locates their knowledge and skills outside the white, the middle class, masculinist government and UN policy discourse. That said, since the Seattle People's Caucus in 1999, this conventional wisdom has been dual powered by initiatives like the World Social Forum, Indigenous Environment Network, World Women's March, Via Campesina and Extinction Rebellion. A recent book, Pluriverse, has opened the political conversation further into a global tapestry of alternatives, fostering alliance building between exponents of buen vivir, Swaraj, Ubuntu, degrowth, ecofeminism, and other ways of worlding. Today, more than ever, land grabs for mining, water extractivism, and other capitalist patriarchal projects threaten people's livelihoods on every continent. Yet the patient reproduction of daily use values at the domestic and geographic peripheries of globalization continues to foster life on Earth. As we move into a post-corona culture, can we be guided by this regenerative imaginary? Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. I'm going to stop recording.